Hello again, and welcome to this interview in the series that is all about empowering a league of extraordinary mothers to lay a strong foundation for health and happiness in our beautiful, precious, gorgeous, often infuriating teenage girls. Today, I am interviewing Kristen A. Jenson. Kristen is the author of the Good Pictures, Bad Pictures series. She's a founder of protectyoungminds.org, a website dedicated to helping parents empower their kids to resist and reject pornography. Kristen is a popular guest on radio and TV broadcasts, as well as podcasts and webinars. She's a leader in the Safeguard Alliance on the National Coalition of End Sexual Exploitation and has testified before the Washington State Senate Law and Justice Committee on the public health crisis of pornography. Kristen continues to be a strong voice for protecting children from all forms of sexual exploitation. Kristen is a mother of 2 daughters and a son who is waiting for her in heaven. Her latest honour is becoming a grandma. Congratulations. She lives with her husband and sassy chocolate schnoodle puppy in the beautiful state of Washington. Thank you so much for being here, Kristen.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
My earliest memories of sort of discovering and thinking and learning about sex and all our lovely body parts was sitting in the corner of a school library with my girlfriends in primary school, and the book from memory was called Where Did I Come From? And I think that was a pretty gentle introduction. But kids today have a very different experience, I think, from a very young age. So, Kristen, what prompted you to write a book about pornography for children?
Well, I'll tell you, Edwina, it was not my life's goal to do this. From when I was a young teenage girl, that was not what I was looking forward to in my life. I didn't see this coming.
Yeah.
But several years ago, I met a woman. We had just moved into a new town, and I met this mother. She had a large family, and we got talking one evening, and she told me about her, really the tragedy that had happened in her family. And it was her 17-year-old son. They found out that he had been sexually molesting his younger brothers and sisters, from the 14-year-old down to the 4-year-old. And of course, he was involved in pornography heavily. And this is no surprise. This should not shock us, because we all know as mothers that children imitate what they see adults do. And I think we've all been horrified and entertained by our children when they imitate some of our phrasing and some of the things we do.
Yeah.
But children are wired that way. That's how they learn to be grown-up adults.
Yeah.
So when they see pornography, they often, many times, act out or can act out on their siblings or cousins or friends. And this is what had happened in her case. So I woke up the next morning and I just ached for her, and I wondered, was there a resource that could help her explain to her children about pornography, because I could see that it was the root cause of this, this situation. And I've since learned that this child-on-child sexual abuse is really a growing, frightening and growing trend. So looked for a resource, couldn't find one, decided I was going to write it myself, and got a lot of help with it, and was able to, it took 3 years to publish it. I thought it was going to take a couple weeks in the summer, but it was very naive of me. And I kept thinking, why hasn't someone else done this? But then after 3 years, I'm like, oh, well, now I know. So so that's kind of the impetus for Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, porn proofing today's young kids.
Yeah. Well, look, I just think that coming this digital age that we've moved into, I guess it is a new frontier of exposure that kids now have. And so I'm so grateful to you for doing that work and providing this resource. So as a resource, I know that I didn't talk to my kids when they were little about pornography. It just would never have occurred to me that was a conversation. It was, I was putting off having the sex talk for as long as I could, and I felt like that wasn't going to happen until they were sort of heading to high school. So your books are actually aimed at children much younger. So can you explain why that is?
Well, children today have access to the internet. From a very young age. And if they don't have access in your home, the minute they leave through the front door to go to a friend's house, they'll have access, right? And in the schools, they have access. So it makes it, it may seem crazy to think about talking to a 7-year-old about pornography, but they're on the internet. They have access to it. It's very common for young children now to be exposed to videos and pictures that we would never want them to see.
Yeah.
So if that's our reality, until we can get the internet, things changed in the environment, till we can get that changed, and I don't know when that's going to be, we can't wait, right? We need to protect our children now. And, the time for just kind of crossing our fingers and hoping that they don't see anything and that they get through childhood without being exposed or tempted or pulled in, that is like long gone. So we need to be proactive parents, and just like you would protect your child from other dangers, if there were animals or insects that were poisonous in your environment, you would warn them. If when a child is young and you warn them about, don't run out into the street, right? Their cars or trucks. And so we don't want them to run out into the street and get run over, but kids are running out into the internet and getting run over. And so we need to warn them. It's our duty as parents. We owe this to our children. They need it. And it might be uncomfortable, but we can do hard things, right? We're moms. We can do hard things.
Yeah.
So this might be a little uncomfortable, but we've tried to make it as comfortable as possible with our books and with our resources.
I know when one of my girls was going, I'm just trying to remember, I think it was about grade 4, and she got a device for the first time. She changed schools, and I knew something was going on. I could just tell that she was, feeling really unhappy about something. And eventually she told me that out of curiosity, she'd typed sex into the Google search bar and had been thoroughly traumatized by what had come up. And I think that's probably a very common way for these kids to get exposed to all sorts of stuff. But, are there other ways that it's sneaking in as well?
Oh, yes. There's so many ways that kids get exposed to pornography. And the way that you just mentioned is very common. When you think about it, when we have a question, what do? I don't know about you, but I have a phone I can talk to, I can say, okay, Google, tell me, what the weather is in whatever city in the world, right? And it'll spit out the weather. So they see us consulting the internet for all kinds of questions. It's natural for them to do the same. And if we haven't been proactive in talking to them and being open with them about these kinds of topics, sex and its counterfeit, which is pornography, then they are going to feel more comfortable going to Google than to us. Right? So you asked about other ways kids get into pornography, and they can get into it through very innocent searches and image searches. They can find it through apps that may seem innocent, but there's a back door to the internet. Even just, good old magazines. I mean, we think, oh, it's all digital, but actually I hear of a lot of kids seeing and first getting into pornography still through magazines or even lingerie ads, that they get interested in. We think, oh, a 5 or 6-year-old is never going to be able to be aroused in any way or interested in a sexual thing because they're not sexual beings.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there is a part of them that can be awakened. And so we need to be careful about that too. So I think, we can try to lock down our devices, and we should. And we can have filters. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I think we should. But we should go about it as like this is just one weapon, in our whole armory. We have to have an internal filter. Children need an internal filter that will go with them wherever they go, whether it's to school, a friend's house, a family member's house, wherever, so that they know what. So I'll just give you the 3 things that children need to know right off the bat. And there's more, but just 3 basic things. 1, they need to have a definition of pornography.
Okay.
And we'll talk about later, one of the giveaways that we're going to have is 3 ways to define pornography to children in age-appropriate ways. So we need to define it so they recognize it. And then we need to help them understand the dangers of pornography, why it's not a good thing, what it can do to their brain. And then 3rd, we need to give them a plan for how to respond to pornography when they see it. So a definition, a warning, and a plan. Yeah. Those 3 things, if children have that, they are on their way to being more resistant to pornography.
That's perfect. Can you just, because often, when we print something out, that's a fantastic resource, but hearing you sort of go through a little bit of what that looks like would probably be, well, I know I would love to hear that. So what is your definition of pornography?
Well, pornography, as we define it in Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, is pictures, videos, or cartoons of people with little or no clothing on.
Okay.
And these pictures focus on the parts of the body that we keep covered with a swimsuit.
Yep.
So it's very simple, right? Very simple. And it just gives them enough information so that they could identify it. We're not going to go into all the, all the different kinds of pornography and everything else. No, or even sex. For a young child, just naked people. That's kind of it. Okay. And I've been kind of criticized because people say, wait a minute, you can go into an art museum and there'll be naked people. Well, we have a great blog post on Protect Young Minds about how to help children understand the difference between art and, nudity in art and nudity in pornography. And there's a vast difference. And we have a few pointers that we can help you understand. But the main thing is this: give kids an age-appropriate, simple definition. And as they get older and as they know about sex, then you can add another definition, which is, it's video pictures that are designed to, have a sexual response, to arouse sexuality, to portray sexual information. And we have that as well on our blog. But you start simple. Yeah. Just give them enough so that they can recognize it. And then as they grow, give them more information.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it does become in my mind, it becomes a trickier and trickier conversation. I mean, I'm talking about girls that are 14 and 16 who have watched, it's obviously sex in movies and respectful sort of sex. So in my mind, when I think about pornography, I think about behaviors that are perhaps being disrespectful to either sex and perhaps violence and all those things. So it sort of leaps into a different category. So I'll be interested to.
Yeah, so that's a good conversation. That's a really good. So is there anything wrong with what we call like female-friendly porn or vanilla porn, whatever, just a man and a woman having sex? I think there is, and I'll tell you why. Because I believe that a sexual relationship, the beauty of a sexual relationship with someone that you're committed to and that is committed to you, and that you have this deep connection with, that is something that you develop that is unique. That relationship, that sexual relationship, is unique. If you watch pornography or even sex in movies and whatever, that's sex the way they want for the camera, right? That may not be the kind that's good for you and your marriage, right? And your relationship. And I feel like that's one really good reason why it's better to just develop it with your partner so that it can be unique. When kids learn to draw flowers in their little art class, it seems like everyone's drawing the same flower. And really, with sex, it should be a very unique. Every relationship is unique. And that's the beauty of it. And if you never get to that level, then you're missing a lot. If sex is simply just performance, then I think you're missing a lot. And I think we're stealing that from our children.
I think that's such a great analogy. That's really, that's a very interesting way to look at it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, it's the way I look at it. I know that many people may not agree with me.
Yeah.
But because I've done a lot of thinking about this. When I first started, I'm like, okay, well, what is really wrong with it? Even at the time I started, I didn't even know about all the violence and the degradation and all the horrible stuff that is now mainstream pornography. I didn't even know about that. I was just thinking about men and women having sex and doing it in front of a camera. Like, okay, well, what is really wrong with that? Especially if you're an adult and you're married and whatever. Is there anything wrong with that? And that's just what I came up with, is that that's a personal, private thing. And I think sex is best when it's private and when it's unique to a couple, something they create that's unique in all the world. And it's just them. And that's what makes, I think, it special. And I think when you start to portray it in media, it gives kids a template, a sexual template that they may try to, imitate, and it's just inauthentic. Not them.
Becomes another thing that perhaps you don't measure up to, or you fail at, or
I mean, that was the thing, and we're kind of getting into something other than pornography, but that was the thing that struck me early on, was that, sex is something that you don't have to be the perfect, gorgeous. I mean, there's just something that is very special. And when kids look at pornography, what's happening is the porn industry is hijacking, the sexual template of our children. And there was a case where there was a young man. He was in a car with a girl. They were having sex or making out or whatever, and he started to choke her. And either a police officer came by or somehow he was caught, and they asked him later, like, what were you doing? Why were you strangling her? And he says, well, isn't that what women want? Isn't that what they like? Well, he'd seen that in porn, right? And he thought, because these young kids are watching this, they must think like, well, that's what women like. They like to be strangled or slapped or smacked or choked or their hair pulled or, whatever. So again, I just feel like the whole premise of pornography is wrong. And if you need to use pornography to get aroused, even in a marriage relationship, there's something inauthentic. I think there's something wrong. There's something, well, maybe that's a little heavy, but I think there's a better way. How's that?
Something missing.
There's something missing, and there's a better way to create that very special relationship. I want my children, to be able to have that much deeper level of an experience and a relationship and a commitment. And pornography does not sell those ideas.
Yeah.
Pornography is selling ideas, it's basically selling the idea that it's a performance. Yeah. It's all about performance. And
so we talk about the word addiction seems to come up a bit with pornography, and it's certainly a word that comes up with all things digital, isn't it? It's it's being addicted to our phones and being addicted to social media, and addiction to pornography is also a very real thing, isn't it? So what does that look like, or how does that come about?
Well, Edwina, all forms of addiction has a process, and we are now finding out through scientific studies that addiction is the same no matter if it's a substance or an experience or a behavior. So, someone's addicted to video games, someone's addicted to gambling, someone's addicted to shopping, someone's addicted to eating. That process is really the same as someone being addicted to heroin or alcohol or tobacco. When it gets down to the neurons and the synapses and the dopamine that's flowing over those synapses, it's all the same addiction process. So you can become addicted to pornography. And I have read many accounts and talked to people who they said that they had other addictions, and those addictions were easier to get over than a pornography addiction. And when you think about it, if you have an alcohol addiction, my own father had a very severe alcohol addiction. You can, but at the very least, you can get it out of your system. You can avoid, pretty much, if you really try, you can avoid going past bars. You can avoid social situations. I mean, if you really want to get over it and you need to avoid people that are going to encourage you to drink, you can avoid those things. But it's very difficult when you have a pornography addiction where now all those pictures and videos are in your brain and you can't get them out. You can't flush them out. And there are triggers everywhere. You walk outside your house, you look at billboards, you go to the mall or the stores, you click on the internet, you're reading a news story, and you come down and boom, there are triggers everywhere. And in an addiction, people get sensitized to those triggers. So if you're not an alcoholic, when you see a billboard, with all this alcohol being advertised, it's not going to light up your brain. It's not going to light up that reward center of your brain. But an alcoholic, when they see that, their pleasure center, their reward center will light up like a Christmas tree. So it's important that we realize that addictions can occur. There is a cycle of addiction, and basically in a pornography addiction, you become addicted to a chemical that your brain makes itself, which is dopamine.
So, if for the mums listening to this, and they may have or be aware of their teenage daughter is looking at pornography, and it is, they feel like it's becoming something that is a real issue. What would that conversation look like, or where do they turn to get help with that?
Okay. Well, first I would say not to react with a lot of emotion. I think it would be better to not react at all and to not say anything at all until you get yourself a little educated on the process of addiction. And on our website, we have several articles. We have articles about girls getting into porn. So get yourself addicted. Get yourself educated about addiction, about especially the issues of girls and addiction, or girls and pornography. So I wouldn't say that because a girl is using pornography or looking at pornography that you automatically assume that they're addicted. You shouldn't, right? And we have a guide on our website called the Smart Parenting Guide, and it runs you through, 5 steps. When you find that your child has viewed porn, here are the things to do, before you get upset or panic. So with girls, many girls get into pornography because they start to read it. I just interviewed a couple of women who are porn addicts. They're in recovery, but very interesting stories about, and they're a little different than the guys. So there's some very interesting differences. I don't know if you want me to talk about those.
Yeah, but I do. I think it's really, really useful to have real life stories. I think that's great. Yeah.
So one gal, well, actually both of them, I should give this caveat. Both of them had been sexually molested as children. And what I found is that some children have been sexually molested, they don't tell anyone, and their parents don't even know.
Right.
So I would, in the back of my mind, I would think about that. Now, that doesn't mean that your daughter is being sexually molested, but it is one way, and this may seem counterintuitive, but looking at pornography is one way for a girl to normalize what happened to her.
Okay, yeah.
And to try to work through the trauma. I don't think it's the best way, but it is the way that they're like, if I can watch it. And in fact, there was a study done that showed that rape victims were drawn to watching rape porn. And it befuddled them until they realized they're trying to normalize what traumatized them.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad. It's normal, right? This happens. So the other reason that girls get into pornography is they feel like they need to know how to attract men. So, hey, how better to learn than to go to pornography and watch the porn stars? Notice it's never a porn actress. It's always a porn star.
Yeah.
I
thought about that, but you're right. Yeah.
And of course, men are all over these women, so they must know something that I need to know. That's one other way. And then girls, they're intrigued. So this is the other thing, is that girls are sexual beings, just like boys are sexual beings, but we always just think boys are. Girls, they wouldn't get into that. They wouldn't, be interested in that. But they are. We are all sexual beings. And so girls just have more shame around it, even than boys. So when a girl, some of the women that we've talked to, they have started with literature. But then they've kind of worked up to, it always seems to end with video. It always seems to end. And sometimes they go through to anime porn as well. It's like cartoon porn is arousing enough, but it's not so real, you know. So sometimes they'll use anime porn. And I feel like it can be it's just as addicting for girls as guys. But they come at it in a more of a, I'm trying to learn. And I will tell you, all kids have the task of growing up. Yeah. And one of the things they have to figure out is sex, right? And if we don't tell them about it, now they have a lot of options.
Yeah.
Figure it out, as we talked about previously. So it's so important to start those conversations early, so we can satisfy their curiosity instead of Google.
Yeah, or, you know, learning from their friends. I mean, we all learn things from our friends. That was that's part of, you know, having peers. But
when I found out what sex was, I immediately went and talked to my friends.
Yeah, yeah.
And guess what? Their parents did not appreciate that.
Yeah, well, you know, I think that's a pretty normal thing. That's a pretty normal thing. So there's, you know, there's the next sort of leap from pornography, and that's that connection between pornography and sex abuse, which, you know, really was where you started with this whole conversation and how you came to be doing this this work that you're doing. But maybe looking at that link a little bit more so that we have an understanding about that as well.
Yeah. Well, we've known that pornography is used to groom children, because if you can get children to look at something and say, hey, these kids are doing it, then you can make them feel more comfortable being basically sexually abused.
It goes back to that whole normalizing conversation, doesn't it?
Right. So as pornography has become more ubiquitous in the world, kids and teenage girls just come to accept that that's what it is. That's normal. And the things that are done in pornography are normal, and I just need to learn to like it. And they shouldn't need to learn to like the abuse that's in there. But we're talking about child abuse. So the links between pornography and child abuse. First of all, like I said, it's used to groom children. Children, unfortunately, that are exposed to pornography, even if they haven't had a hands-on perpetrator, sometimes go on to abuse other children. And this is a skyrocketing phenomenon. Because as I said before, they are wired to imitate what they see done. I was talking with a nurse who is a sexual assault nurse examiner. And what she does is, when children come into the hospital who have been sexually abused, she examines them for forensic evidence for law enforcement. And when she first started, she thought, oh, most of the perpetrators are going to be like dirty old men, right? 60-year-old pedophiles. And she said what she found is that most of the perpetrators are between 11 and 15.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
So why would that be?
Oh,
what is causing 11 to 15-year-olds to perpetrate on other children? I mean, obviously some of those children have experienced child abuse, but just sexual abuse. But so many of them have been looking at pornography. And what she said is, so many times the mother, maybe it's a sibling, right, will say, yeah, it's my older son, and yeah, he's into porn. Or it's, this girl's cousin, and yeah, he's into porn. I mean, they know, and they offer it up, is what she told me. They just offer that information that, yeah, he's into porn. And so it's like, yeah, we can already see this connection. And what we're trying to do is work to get this documented, right? So that we can see clearly the numbers, the data that yes, there is this connection between porn viewing and acting out sexually on other children. So that's why it's important to really teach children from a young age some basics, right? No one should ever show you pornography, and if they do, come and tell mom or dad. No one should ever ask to touch you and your private parts. Just these body safety rules. No one should ever take a picture of you without your clothes on, and you shouldn't do that either.
That's another big thing that's becoming such a hot topic, is this sexting, and our kids, our teenagers particularly, taking photos of their boobs or whatever and penises and sending them to their friends, and then it gets shared across the school, and then it's out in the big wide world. And
like
poor
they
kids
don't understand how vulnerable they're making themselves. They think it's just funny, or and kids don't think. I mean, that's their brain is not yet fully developed. Their thinking brain is not yet fully developed. So unfortunately, they have this amazing power put into their hands in the form of a smartphone.
Yeah.
And they don't have the maturity, most of them.
I think that's I was, in doing the research that I'm doing for this summit, I saw somebody talking about the fact that it's actually illegal for these kids to be taking photos of their private parts and putting them on the internet, and they can actually be prosecuted for it. That's probably the least of my worries as a mum. But there's so many levels to this rising problem of what we're facing. And I just think that the word normalizing is what I'm taking from this conversation, is that, it's becoming so normal for these kids to do these things, and how we as mums turn that around, and the conversations that we need to be having, and being empowered with the right language, because it is so awkward having these conversations with our kids. I would love to meet a mum that doesn't find it awkward, so I can absorb some of her courage.
I'll tell you one thing. If you start early, it's not as hard.
Yeah.
If you start with young children, it's like, a 5-year-old, whatever you tell them, they believe, right? Yeah. And so when you start young, opening that door to those conversations, as they get older, it is just natural. It is just normal. It's not going to be so awkward. Now, if you start when they're 14, you're going to have to kind of like get over that awkward barrier, but it's still so important to talk to our kids. So when you were talking about normalizing, when you're mentioning that, this is what I've come to when I talk to youth. And sometimes I'm asked to speak to groups of youth and their parents. What I do is I have a chart in one of my slides that shows, on one side, that lists all the characteristics of a healthy sexual relationship. And on the other side, I list all the characteristics of pornography. And you can show them they're exactly opposite. So, for example, a healthy sexual experience, a healthy sexual relationship is one where both partners are interested in the other, right? Giving to the other. It's not selfish. It's more, selfless. It's, I'm concerned about you and your experience and how you feel, and you're concerned about me and how I feel, and and that's when it works the best, right? But porn is all about it turns a person to become more self-centered.
Yeah.
It's all about my own pleasure and what makes, me aroused, and what you do for me. And it becomes very me-centered, very, very, So, and you know, in a real relationship between two people that love each other, you know, they may be in great shape or they may not be in great shape, but that isn't the most important thing, right? It's that personal connection and the love that they share. Whereas in pornography, you don't get any love, really. You just get performance, and often it's violence. And so they're just opposite, really. And you can do this with your daughter. You can go down and say, okay, well, this is what I think of a healthy sexual relationship. And really, what's healthy for a sexual relationship is the same thing that's healthy for any relationship, right? It's real, right? It's authentic. It's honest. It's not fantasy, right? It's real.
Yeah.
And so you can list those characteristics, and then you can go down, you can list these other characteristics of what porn is all about. And so I think that's a good exercise. And maybe you wouldn't do it on the first discussion, but I think that could be something very instructive, because most of these kids are not stopping to think about this.
Yeah.
They're just accepting.
Is that comparison chart on your website, Kristen? Is that something that we can find?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I've
I
written
just
so
think,
many
when I talk about having the courage for us mums to talk to our girls about this, it's really in that desire to find exactly the right language and the right way to present it, because we don't want to portray that sex is anything other than a wonderful thing, because it is.
Right.
But how to have that conversation so that we get it right is what, I have that perfectionist gene.
Well, that's a really good point, is that we want to get it right, but it's better to start and get it a little bit right than to never start at all because we're so afraid of not getting it right. Look, if you love your daughter, you're going to get it right. You're going to explore it together, and you can be honest, and you can just say, look, this is uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
I love you, and I feel like there's some things that will be helpful if we talk about, them together and explore this together. And I'm learning this. I'm just learning this. So now I wanted to share it with you and get your thoughts.
That's perfect.
With teachers, you kind of have to draw them in and have them, it's not a lecture mode, right?
Yeah.
It's a discovery mode but they need your mentoring.
Yeah.
So get educated and then work with them, making sure they get to talk a lot, and don't do it in an hour-long session. In a 5-minute session when you're on the way to the grocery store.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Do it side by side. When we're looking at each other like this and you're talking about a difficult topic sometimes, and if there's a relationship thing, it can be hard, intimidating. But if you're sitting side by side in a car going to the grocery store, whatever, that's much less intimidating.
Yeah.
And it can be a great place to start.
Yeah.
And there's lots of like launching points. You can say, hey, I saw something online, wondered what you thought about this, or I saw an article, what do you think about that? I'd love to discuss it with you.
Well, that's the purpose of this summit. I mean, just by doing this interview, we've created a conversation, and now the conversation just needs to continue. And I do think that when we're talking to our teenage girls, well, I don't think I know that, as soon as we go into lecture mode and this is right and that's wrong, then the blinds come up and everything shuts down. So just
guilty as charged, though. I've done it.
Oh, look, I think we all have. We all have. That is just wonderful, and it's perfect. I feel like I've learned, a great deal about how to go about these conversations, and I'm really grateful to you for having this conversation. Kristen, I know that you have a free gift for the listeners of this summit. Did you want to tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I've got some bonus guides. First of all is one called Three Simple Definitions Pornography Kids Can Understand. Now, these are not only talk about, what it is in a very simple term, so you could start with your younger daughters or sons, but also talk about how it can make you feel, because kids often get confused. They may feel like repulsed, but at the same time, like curiously attracted, right?
Mhm.
So it's important to help children understand that. And then a kind of a definition for an older child. And then we have, is my child ready for a smartphone? I think there's not one certain age, but I do believe there are certain standards or certain questions. So there's like 10 questions that you can ask yourself about your child's maturity. For example, you have rules maybe around, how much TV they watch, or how long they're on the video game, or, whatever parenting rules you've already kind of laid down. And if your child is pushing against those all the time, and they're not respecting some of these, rules that you've put into place, or maybe that you've even agreed upon as a family, it's always good to get buy-in. If they're always pushing and they're not willing to hold right to those guidelines or rules, then maybe they're not ready for a smartphone, right? They need to be mature enough to follow some rules. And the other thing I always say about smartphones is that don't give your child a smartphone. Lend your child a smartphone. It's not theirs. It's yours. You're paying for it. There's a whole different psychology when you do it that way. When you say, here, this is my smartphone. You can use it now that you're 14, 15, whatever age you've decided, or if your child is ready. But here are the rules, and here are the consequences if you don't follow the rules. So then the other one is Body Safety Toolkit. This is very popular. It's so parents can help children create a body safety plan. And I don't care how old you are, how young you are, we need to teach our children these body safety rules and help them understand how to stay safe. So this has been a very popular guide with parents, and I think very helpful.
Perfect.
So you get all three in this bonus, and I think that these three things are really, these three guides are really, really helpful.
That's so generous. I'm so grateful for you, this conversation. I just think it is really, really timely. And I think it's very important. And just, I really hope that mothers are able to use this as a starter conversation and can, keep it rolling from here. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Kristen.
You're welcome, Edwina. It's been great. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. All right. Bye for now.